It was a quiet evening, the kind where the world seemed to hold its breath. I was just returning from a long training session out in the woods. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the horizon. As I drove my truck down the deserted country road, the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional bark from my dog, Max, who was sitting next to me in the front seat. Max wasn't just a dog to me. He was my partner, my companion, the one who had my back in situations where no one else could be trusted. We had been through hell together, and I'd saved his life more times than I could count. He was more than a family member, he was the reason I was still breathing. As I pulled into my driveway, something felt off. I noticed 2 police cars parked near the entrance, their flashing lights cutting through the dimming light like a warning. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. Max growled, sensing something was wrong. I killed the engine, slowly opened the door, and stepped out, keeping a hand on my holstered sidearm. Max stayed in the truck, alert and watching. "Sir, step away from the vehicle," one of the officers shouted. I froze. "What the hell is going on?" "You're under suspicion," another officer said, his voice firm but with an edge of nervousness. They didn't seem to be approaching with the usual confidence of officers dealing with routine matters. Something was different this time. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I took in their tense postures, the way they held their weapons slightly raised. They were scared. And I didn't know why. Max's growl grew louder, and before I could react, he leapt from the truck, charging toward the officers. He wasn't just a dog, he was trained to protect me at all costs. "Max!" I shouted, my voice breaking through the tension. But it was too late. One of the officers, panicking, pulled his gun. The last thing I saw was the flash of the muzzle before everything went black. I woke up to the sound of shouting. My head throbbed as if I'd been hit by a sledgehammer. Blinking against the bright lights, I tried to focus, but my vision was blurry. The first thing I saw was Max, standing between me and the officers, still growling, his eyes locked on the man who had raised his weapon. "You shot him." I croaked, my voice thick with anger and disbelief. The officers froze, their eyes flicking from me to the dog and back. I could see the guilt written all over their faces, but it was too late. The damage had been done. "You shot my dog." I repeated, my voice a growl now. Max was hurt. I could see the blood, fresh and dark, soaking his fur. The officer who had pulled the trigger stepped back, his hands shaking, as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. "Sir, it wasn't meant to," one of them started, but I was already on my feet, ignoring the pain in my skull as I moved toward Max. I reached him, and for a second, I felt a crushing wave of helplessness. But Max wasn't just any dog. He was trained, he was strong, and we had been through far worse together. He licked my hand weakly, his tail wagging despite the blood. "I'm going to make them regret this," I muttered under my breath, my jaw clenching. The officers were still standing there, frozen, waiting for me to make the first move. They had no idea who they had just messed with. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" I asked, my voice cold and deadly calm. One of them finally spoke, his voice unsteady. "We're just doing our job, sir." "We thought he was a threat, a threat?" I interrupted, glaring at him, my fingers curling into fists. "You have no clue what you've done. I'm Delta Force. And you just made the biggest mistake of your lives." Max stood at my side, ready to defend me, even if it meant his life. We weren't just a team. We were family. And no one hurts my family. The tension in the air was so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. I could feel the officers' fear, their hesitation, and it was driving me mad. They had no idea who they were dealing with. One of the officers, the one who'd fired the shot, started to step forward, his hands still shaking. "We're sorry, sir. We thought your dog was, don't you dare." I snapped, my voice low and full of threat. "You thought my dog was a threat? You thought I was a threat? Max whimpered slightly, his legs shaky, but he stood firm next to me. I could see the look of pure regret on the officers' faces now, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Not until they understood the depth of their mistake. I took a step toward them, feeling the weight of my training take over. This wasn't just about a dog anymore. This was about respect. This was about making them understand that you don't make enemies of people who've been trained to take down entire organizations, who've been through more than most could imagine. I wasn't some civilian they could push around. You have no idea what you've just triggered, I growled, my hand hovering over my holstered weapon. I could tell they were starting to realize the gravity of their situation. The officer who had spoken earlier looked at his partner, his voice cracking. We didn't know. We thought, no, I interrupted. You didn't think. You reacted out of fear. And now, you'll regret it. Trust me, I don't make threats. I follow through. Max growled again, his voice low and guttural, as if to punctuate my words. The officers backed up slowly, their hands raised in a sign of surrender, but I wasn't about to let them off that easily. You're going to get him patched up. Right now, I demanded, my eyes burning with intensity. We can help him. We can get him to the hospital, one of them said, his voice trembling. I nodded once, sharply. You're damn right you are. And when you do, you're going to make sure you never forget what happens when you take someone's family for granted. I will be watching, every step of the way. The tension didn't break, but it did shift. They knew they had no choice but to comply. I could see it in their eyes, they knew what was at stake now. I had trained for years to handle high-stress situations like this. But this? This was personal. And when it came to family, nothing else mattered. The hospital lights were too bright, and the sterile smell in the air made my stomach churn. Max had been rushed in under my strict orders, and I watched the entire process, every detail burned into my mind. The officers were standing to the side, looking like they wanted to disappear. Good. They knew better than to try anything else. Max was stable now, but it didn't change the fact that the mistake they made could have cost him everything. As they tended to him, I sat on the edge of the waiting room, the silence heavy around me. My body ached, but my mind raced. I couldn't let this go. This wasn't just about the dog, it was about showing that there was a price to pay when you crossed the line. I'm sorry about your dog, sir, one of the officers said hesitantly, stepping forward. The rest of them stayed back, but I could see the apprehension in their eyes. They were no longer officers, they were just people now, scared people. And they knew that I could make their lives hell if I wanted to. I didn't look up as I spoke. Sorry. That doesn't cut it. You don't just apologize for something like that. You don't walk away from what you've done like it's nothing. I'm not some petty criminal you can write off. I've served this country, bled for it, and I damn well deserve the respect that comes with it. You took my family away from me. The officer shifted uncomfortably but didn't argue. He knew I wasn't going to back down. Max and I have been through hell, I continued, my voice dangerously calm. You think I'm just going to forget that you almost killed him? Think again. I paused, letting my words hang in the air. It wasn't just about anger, it was about showing them how serious I was. One of the officers spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. What do you want us to do? We'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I finally looked up, locking eyes with the officer. I want you to understand. I want you to know that if anything happens to him, if you don't fix this, I will make sure the world knows about it. And I won't rest until you pay the price. I stood up, my hand clenched into a fist as I turned and walked toward the door. The officers didn't try to stop me. They knew I meant every word. As I stepped out into the cold night air, I felt a sense of finality settle over me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But I would make sure that they never forgot who I was, who Max was, and the price of crossing us. The next few days felt like a blur. I spent every moment at the hospital with Max, watching over him as the doctors worked tirelessly to treat the bullet wound. It was touch and go for a while, but the stubborn dog had fought through worse. I knew he wouldn't let something like this keep him down for long. I had called in favors from old contacts, making sure every report was scrutinized, that the officers' actions would be looked at from every possible angle. The more I pushed, the more the cracks started to show. It didn't take long before rumors started circulating. I knew exactly what was coming next, and I wasn't going to let up. On the third day, I was sitting in the waiting room when a familiar face walked through the door. Lieutenant Harris. A friend from my days in Delta. He had a calm presence, but I could see the concern in his eyes when he saw me. "You're making waves," he said, settling into the chair next to me without asking. His voice was low, measured. "I have to," I replied, my gaze focused on Max, who was now resting comfortably on his bed. "They almost killed him. I can't just let it go." "I know," Harris said, nodding slowly. "But you need to be careful. The department's already getting nervous. The higher-ups are starting to ask questions, and they're not happy." I turned my gaze toward him, my expression hardening. "I'm not playing games, Harris. This isn't just about me and Max. They crossed a line." He sighed, rubbing his chin. "I get it. But you've got to think long-term. You don't want this to get out of hand. The last thing you need is for this to turn into a full-blown media circus. I'll deal with that when the time comes. Right now, I need to make sure they understand what they did." Harris stared at me for a long moment, then stood up. "I'll help you with whatever you need. But remember, we need to stay smart about this." As he walked out of the room, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Harris knew what he was talking about. He knew the system. But this wasn't just about politics or tactics, it was about respect. And I wasn't going to back down until those officers understood that. By the time Max was ready to leave the hospital, I had everything in place. The legal teams were moving, the media was on edge, and I was prepared to turn this into a full-scale battle. The officers had no idea what they had unleashed. It was a week before the investigation officially went public. In the meantime, I spent my time at home with Max, making sure he was healing properly. He was more than just my partner, he was my family, and I wasn't about to let anyone forget that. Every time I looked at him, I felt that old anger rise in me again. The officers might have thought they'd gotten away with it, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I knew it was only a matter of time before they tried to sweep it under the rug. It's what people like them always did. But I wasn't about to let that happen. This wasn't just about the police officers involved anymore. This was about sending a message that you don't mess with someone who knows how to fight back. The press conference came sooner than I expected. Harris had warned me, and I was prepared. The room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing, eager for the next big story. I stood at the front, Max by my side, looking like the proud, battle-tested dog he was. His fur had started to grow back over the wound, but the scar would stay, just like the mark this would leave on everyone involved. One of the reporters spoke up, his voice cutting through the noise. "What would you say to the officers involved in the shooting of your dog, sir?" I stood tall, taking a moment to gather my thoughts before responding. What I'd say to them? I'd say that no amount of apology can fix what they've done. They shot my dog, and in doing so, they've shown they have no regard for the life of anyone they consider a threat. They made a mistake, but now they will have to live with the consequences of their actions. Another reporter shouted a question, "Do you think the officers acted with malice? Or was it just a mistake?" "I don't think it matters," I replied, my tone cold. "What matters is that their actions put my family in danger. And that's something they can't just walk away from. They didn't just make a mistake, they made a choice. And now, they're going to face the consequences for it." A murmur ran through the crowd, some reporters scribbling frantically, others holding up microphones, waiting for more. The words were out now. The wheels were turning. There would be no stopping this. I turned my attention to the camera, addressing the public directly. I've served this country. I've been in situations where my life was on the line, and I've watched others make the ultimate sacrifice. I've never let fear rule me. But what those officers did was driven by fear. They saw my dog, and they panicked. They shot first and asked questions later. This is a warning. I'm not going to let this go. I will make sure they're held accountable. The room fell silent. The gravity of what I had just said hung in the air. This wasn't about a simple mistake anymore, it was about trust. And they had broken it. The media storm hit harder than I expected. News outlets ran with the story, each with their own spin, but they all centered around one thing: the public was outraged. My statement had struck a nerve, and people wanted answers. Everyone from local news stations to national reporters were digging into the situation, demanding accountability from the police department. The officers involved had gone silent, and it didn't take long for their superiors to begin distancing themselves from the incident. But I knew that wasn't enough. I had set this fire, and I wasn't going to let it die out until every last detail was brought to light. I spent the next few days dealing with lawyers, getting Max the care he needed, and watching the tension grow around the police department. The pressure was mounting, and I could see the cracks in their walls. Then, one evening, I received a call from an old contact in the department. It was Captain Reynolds. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I trusted him. When he said he had something important to discuss, I didn't hesitate. I met him in a quiet, dimly lit cafe on the edge of town. He was wearing plain clothes, no uniform, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the last week. He slid into the booth across from me and immediately spoke in a low, urgent tone. "They're trying to cover it up. The department's circling the wagons. There's a push to sweep this under the rug. But it's not going to work, not with the pressure you've brought," Reynolds said, his eyes flicking nervously around the room. "Of course they're covering it up," I muttered. "That's what they always do. But it's not going to work this time." He nodded. "I don't think it will. But I need you to understand something. If you keep pushing this, the department's going to collapse. There are people at the top who'll do anything to protect their own, and they won't hesitate to take you down if it means saving face. You've made a lot of enemies with this." "I don't care about their enemies," I said, leaning forward. "I care about the truth. I care about the fact that they took something from me. They took Max from me. And they'll never walk away from it." Reynolds looked at me for a long moment before speaking again. "I know. But the longer you keep pushing, the uglier it's going to get. You've got a lot of eyes on you now. They won't just target you, they'll go after everyone connected to you, too." I didn't flinch. "Let them come. They can't stop me." Reynolds sighed. "I can't tell you what to do, but you're about to enter a battle that's going to change everything. If you're ready for that, I'll support you. But you need to understand that once you cross this line, there's no going back." "I crossed that line the moment they hurt Max," I said, my voice cold and determined. "There's no going back for them either." The conversation ended there. I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about getting justice anymore, it was about making sure the officers who made that fatal mistake faced the consequences. They needed to understand that actions like theirs couldn't be ignored or forgotten. The day of reckoning came sooner than I expected. The police department, under mounting pressure from the public and the media, had no choice but to open an internal investigation. But I knew that wasn't enough. I needed to see justice done, and I wasn't going to leave it to some internal board to decide. The city council had already called an emergency meeting, with the media in full attendance. I had been invited to speak, and I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. Max was by my side, as always, his presence a reminder of what was at stake. I walked into the room, the weight of the past few weeks heavy on my shoulders. The room went quiet the moment I stepped up to the podium. The council members were seated at the front, their faces a mix of nervousness and uncertainty. They didn't know what to expect, but I wasn't about to let them play this off like it was just another routine issue. I started with the basics, giving them a clear picture of what had happened that night, how the officers had shot Max, how they had acted out of fear and ignorance, and how they had tried to cover it up afterward. But as I spoke, I felt the anger rising again, the same anger I'd carried with me since that moment. Max was more than just a dog, I said, my voice steady but sharp. He was family. He's my partner, my companion, my equal. And they took him from me. And for what? Because they were too afraid to think, too quick to act. The room was silent, but the weight of my words hit hard. I could see some council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. They didn't know how to respond. The truth had already hit them. But this isn't just about Max, I continued. This is about accountability. This is about making sure that those who wear a badge remember what it means to serve and protect. Not just themselves, not just their egos. But the people they've sworn to protect. And right now, these officers, those who shot my dog, those who thought it was okay to act out of fear, need to face the consequences of their actions. The room was tense, everyone hanging on my words. I could feel the power shift. This was no longer just about Max. It was about the integrity of the system, about showing that no one was above accountability. Then, I turned to the officers who had shown up at the meeting. Their faces were pale, their eyes filled with guilt. They knew what was coming. Those officers will face the full consequences, one of the council members said, his voice surprisingly firm. We have already begun the process to ensure a proper investigation. And if found guilty, they will be removed from their positions. I nodded, satisfied. Good. But let's make sure it doesn't stop there. Let's make sure that everyone knows that when you make a mistake like this, there's no room for excuses. Not in law enforcement. Not in society. The tension in the room began to dissipate, but I wasn't done yet. I wasn't walking away until I knew Max's justice was secured. The council members exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement. The officers who had fired the shot stood up, looking defeated, but I didn't care about their apologies or their regrets. They had crossed a line, and it was time for them to face the consequences. The final word came from the mayor, who stood slowly and nodded at me. We will ensure that this matter is resolved fully. Thank you for bringing it to our attention, and thank you for your service. As I left the meeting, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't over yet, but it was a step in the right direction. The battle had been long and hard, but I had fought for what mattered. Max was still healing, but he was home. And as for the officers, they would face the consequences, and the world would know that no one, not even those with badges, could escape accountability. I looked down at Max as we walked out of the room. He gave me a soft, knowing look. We had won this round, but there would always be more battles to fight. And I would be ready.